Welcome to All About Impact, the official podcast of Imagine If Insights and Strategy. I'm your host, Susan Petoyan. All About Impact is the only podcast in the world that is exclusively dedicated to the art and science of creating real and positive impact with data, research, and insights. We push ambitious marketers, practitioners, and users of data, research, and insights to create meaningful, tangible, real-world impact with their work. Join us as we bring you diverse perspectives from hand-picked impact champions, incredible cross-disciplinary leaders who are masters at activating insights to transform business and achieve unparalleled success for their teams, organizations, careers, and of course, customers. Now is the time to venture into the world of influence and impact far beyond data and insights. Tune in today and boldly unleash the impact champion in you. In this episode of All About Impact, my guest is Marine Palamutyan of DocuSign, a passionate, influential, and customer-obsessed UX researcher. Marine has more than a decade of UX research experience in building excellent digital products in financial services and tech. She also brings real gravitas as both a UX strategist and a master tactician to our conversation about achieving impact with UX research. And speaking of impactful UX research, have you ever wondered about the chicken and the egg debate in UX? I mean, how important is focusing on building the right product or building a product right? What's more impactful, having the most intuitive user experiences or solving, say, an actual customer problem with a digital experience? In this episode, we go in depth about all that goes into making UX research the most impactful it could be, the strategies and the tactics. So tune in and take notes. Welcome to another episode of All About Impact, Imagine If's podcast about all things research, insights, and impact. Today, we have an absolutely amazing guest, Marine Palamutyan. She brings about 10 years, or I think a little more than a decade of experience in UX that drives product strategy, specifically with roots in financial services, but most recently in tech. So we're going to have a lot of fun talking about different industry learnings. Marine, formerly you were in Wells Fargo and Union Bank, and now you are part of the awesome UX research team at DocuSign, in charge of, it sounds like, for application experiences and product-led growth, which sound like exactly some of the types of insights we'd love to hear. But obviously, Marine, we should focus more on your personal kind of perspectives, personal insights. You just have such an amazing journey that I want to make sure that our audience learns and hears that and learns from kind of your personal career trajectory and everything you've learned. I would love to welcome, first of all.
Thank you. Excited to be here.
Yes, it's been a while. It's so good to see you. And I would love to start off, Marine, if you're okay with this, with giving you an opportunity to kind of tell your story of how you ended up in UX and what was the path you traveled to get to where you are. Everybody has such a different, kind of journey that I think it's important to start with that. So tell us how you got where you are.
Yeah, of course. Thank you. Yeah, and just before we kick it off, again, to make my blanket statement, opinions expressed are solely my own and do not express the views or opinions of my employer. But yeah, happy to share my background. So I have more of an untraditional career journey to UX research, so to speak. Earlier in my career, I worked in much smaller companies, so wearing multiple hats, ranging from sales to marketing to customer service and whatever else was needed to get done, right? After earning my MBA, I joined Wells Fargo at that time, which was my first experience working in an enterprise. And over the course of nearly 10 years with them, I had many opportunities to collaborate with cross-functional teams on various strategic initiatives and digital transformation projects, which is actually how I stumbled on UX research field. So this was back in 2013. I was on the ethnography team at the time, where I partnered, with the UX research team on a number of projects. And I got a pretty good sense of what it's like to work on that team, which also helped me recognize how much potential there is to make an impact on the product direction and strategy, just being more closely aligned with the product organization. So with a little encouragement from good friends and colleagues, I made the switch to UX research. And I'm still happy about that decision almost 10 years later. So
Awesome. It's interesting it feels like obviously, with the digital revolution, etc. But most recently in the last few years, it feels like everything has sped up, right? Not mostly, maybe mostly because of the pandemic, but also lots of investment going into kind of building digital products, digital applications, etc. I think we're really really perfectly positioned to talk about this notion of impact and how research can really make a difference in the UX space in particular, which I think is something that the broader kind of research community thinks a lot about. But I don't know if the intersection of the two is something that we talk a lot about. So I'm excited to dive right in, Marina. So the first question is about, like everybody thinks about impact and kind of shapes that definition differently, depending on the field, depending on kind of the context, where they're operating, where they're bringing the voice of the consumer or the user to the organization. I'm curious to find out how you personally think about the difference that your work, over the years has made, specifically through the UX lens. What is your definition of impact?
Yeah, so just to kind of touch on your point earlier, I totally agree. I think the demand for the research specifically has increased as many companies recognize the importance of delivering useful and usable experiences to their customers, right? I'm sure you've heard of the user-centered design principle, like build the right thing and then build the thing right, which is essentially like, let's make sure we're focusing on building products and experiences that solve customers' problems and needs, hence delivering value, right? And then focusing on making those experiences intuitive and easy to use for customers. I think, unfortunately, with the pressure to deliver products on a regular cadence to the market, sometimes we kind of bias towards the latter, which is focusing on the usability. Can they figure out how to use this? Which is also important, but I think if you deliver product and experiences that don't solve the customer's needs and problems, then no matter how intuitive and easy it is to use, customers are not going to adopt it, right? So then you start having issues with low adoption, and which ultimately has business impact, right? And then it affects the bottom line of revenue and growth. I think in terms of like to achieve strategic impact in UX research specifically, it's important to have that comprehensive understanding of our customers and their needs. So this can be accomplished by conducting foundational research, right, to understand and uncover the customer needs and pain points. So or leveraging a number of frameworks such as like personas and jobs to be done to kind of get that deeper insight and understanding of who's our target customer, what are we trying to help them solve, what are they trying to accomplish. So then we're prioritizing to build those products and experiences that help them to achieve those things. And the other thing is really around researchers needing to collaborate with stakeholders, right? Ensuring that their insights are measurable, they're data-driven, they're aligned with the overall business strategy, and they're constantly learning and evolving their methodologies too, right? You can't use just if you have a hammer, like everything is like a nail, as the saying goes, right? So it's just a combination of those things. But I think first is understanding the customer's need and make sure that we're designing and building products that are solving those. So yeah.
Great. I love that. You gave such a rich kind of densely packed answer there, Marina. I'd love to kind of probe on a couple of things. So it sounds like the premise of starting with a problem, I don't know if you would personally feel like that's almost like it's a requirement, right? To make sure that the work developing, but also, all the work that goes into researching is impactful. So I think that's a key highlight for us. I mean, for our audience, right? You want to make sure that there's a clear definition of what is that problem that we're trying to solve. What other quote unquote requirements, do you feel like you must have before we can say a particular project or a particular initiative, UX research initiative specifically, must have in order for it to be deemed successful and effective and impactful?
Yes, I think the biggest one is just starting with making sure that we're framing the right problem, right? And we touched on that because when I am in meetings with stakeholders, the first thing I ask is like, what are you trying to solve? Like, what are we actually solving here, right? And how big is the problem, like how many customers is this impacting, right? Or users. I don't like to use the word users as much. I like to keep the focus on customers. But I would say that's kind of the core of it, is just getting to the bottom of what it is that we are trying to solve. And then through different stages of the product development lifecycle, right, is then you kind of start moving into that, okay, let's iterate, as we're building concepts, let's test it with customers often, and getting that feedback. So we're incorporating the voice of the customer throughout the development process.
Awesome. Great. In other types of research, perhaps in some of the foundational research that you use as a premise or as a starting place, we talk about objectives, but like beyond just research objectives, what is the business goal? Like in this case specifically, what is the problem that the business is trying to address? I love that, because without that, basically, what are we doing, right? It's the basic question there. So what are some of the barriers or challenges to driving impact that you guys in the world of UX research as leaders, in between the consumer and the different stakeholders around the product, that you often see and overcome in order for these results to be strategic and truly actionable?
Right. Yeah. Well, there are a number, but we'll focus on, I would say, like the top three, right? Just the top three.
Perfect.
I would say, like, first and foremost, it's typically when there's lack of executive support. So one of the biggest challenges is when like UX research leaders face is that lack of that support at an executive level. And without buy-in from senior leaders, that it becomes difficult to prioritize UX research, get necessary resources, right? Or to conduct research at scale. So I would say that's one of the biggest, but I will say that we're kind of at that point where we're shifting and seeing a lot more of the support, because I think a lot more leaders are starting to see the value and importance of making sure, hey, we're building the right products, we're meeting customers' needs and exceeding customer needs. And it's become more and more prominent, right, the field itself. But
great.
I think in general too, like one of the ways to overcome that, if that's still the case where you're faced with it, is to find stakeholders who are as customer-centric and UX research enthusiasts, so to speak, so who can become your allies, right? So you partner with them to have a success story or two, which will then help demonstrate, like, hey, here's the value of research to the rest of the organization and leadership. Because once you have one or two tangible examples and case studies of success, then you can say, like, this is what we did, this is how it impacted the project and the business, and then get everyone excited to rally around it, and then say, okay, now we need more resources, right? We need to expand the team if we want to do more of these for other areas of the product. The other thing is limited resources, which we kind of talked about, it's a big challenge, right? Including time and budget and staffing, which can make it difficult to conduct research and deliver insights that are actionable and strategic to begin with. I think this is an ongoing challenge for all leaders, which is why radical prioritization is crucial to success. So I think identifying what are your company's top priorities or big bets, so to speak, and then trying to staff those strategic projects first. And then the rest of the requests could become potentially backlog, or we could put some systems or tools in place to enable stakeholders to conduct the research themselves, right? And then maybe it's some more simple tactical research that they can manage themselves. So then your seasoned researchers are more focused on the strategic and more complex things, which are helping really kind of distill, like, what's the problem we're trying to solve and what does the customer journey look like, et cetera. So, and the third one is activating insights. And I think, like, lack of potentially effective communication and storytelling can hinder the ability to activate insights. And what do I mean by activating insights? It's ensuring that the insights and recommendation that the team is delivering is acted upon by stakeholders, right? Because you may deliver gold nuggets, but you don't, do it in a way that resonates with the stakeholders or isn't compelling. They won't implement the recommendations, right? Because they have a long laundry list of other priorities to tackle. And like, how do you overcome this, right? Is to kind of have that need to develop effective communication skills and also strong storytelling, with data. And that way you're able to compel your stakeholders to take action by helping them understand, okay, what is the business impact and what is the customer impact, right? And you can demonstrate the business impact by triangulating data, right? And saying, okay, look at the size of this problem and how it's impacting the business. For example, one of the projects I was working years ago was building capabilities in a mobile app for customers to manage their debit or credit cards. Like if they lose it, they can cancel it or put a hold on it, right? And freeze it. And so we look back at number of customer calls related to that, and we're able to estimate an operational cost to the business, right? To say like, hey, here's the X number we are spending on fielding and like supporting these types of calls. But if we can enable self-service to customers, they're able to do that. So just kind of connecting and triangulating that data. And then the other piece is demonstrating the customer impact, right, to help them develop empathy. And you could do that by incorporating like customer stories or quotes or even video like snippets from a session showing a customer like struggling with a specific experience or a problem they have. So then that kind of helps the stakeholders focus on be enticed to like want to solve those problems.
Love it. There's so much good stuff there, Marine. I'm going to go back to the first you said, which is to have executive sponsorship or at least attention on the initiative, on the project. And often we assume that that's there, especially in UX, right? Because, why would you work on something that is not there's not a business case for it, let's say, that's tied to a department or an executive, et cetera. But what are some of the kind of levers that, someone like you or someone on teams like yours might have to influence up so that, let's say, specifically in this case, when you're kind of bringing a new idea or a new problem, may not be new, but a problem that you deem as a strategist, as a product, kind of very close to product, close to the consumer, you serve up. In other words, you're looking for an executive sponsor, right? Do you feel like the dynamics are different when there is, someone who's saying, hey, I need this fixed or I need this addressed, as opposed to you guys have to, kind of bubble it up and get the executive team to understand, agree, and allocate resources?
Yeah, I think it's definitely different. And I think when interacting with executives, you have to figure out their language, which is business, right? Is trying to point out the business problem and really focusing on that and say like, hey, this is how we can solve it. And this is the big business problem. And this is why we need to solve it. So then they become on board with that. And again, I think if you are able to find stakeholders who can be your allies, so then you have kind of a united point of view that you're presenting, and that could be maybe UX design or product management, that you are all working together to make that pitch, so to speak, to executive leadership. But I think if you're able to clearly highlight what's the business impact, whether it's saving on operational cost or increasing revenue or adoption, you will have their attention. So, and I think more often than not, they would be willing to give it a chance and see how it goes. And you can start with low stake projects, right? Or things that are not going to delay the timelines too drastically, which is also another common challenge, is like, how do we build in the time to bring timely insights, so then the teams are able to act upon it and make iterations.
Great. One of the other things you mentioned there was the importance of not just speaking their language, but kind of curating the right stories based on whatever the data set is, right? As a tool, as a skill or a tool that you can use to really drive decision-making, activation, and hopefully unlock some lift in revenue or whatever the metric is there. The question I have is this issue of when those two variables collide or cross. So let's say it's a sponsored project. If there's a clear desire, somebody, the right team and such is interested in building something out or fixing something, let's say, and the truth comes out that does not support their expected hypotheses or the direction that they were going in, right? Or sometimes calling somebody's concept or somebody's product ugly. These are very technical, scientific terms here. But how do you, as someone with a lot of experience in this space and kind of playing in both worlds, Manya, how do you balance those two things out, especially if things don't work out and you have to work extra hard, or you have to be more intentional or more careful in how you deliver the results to still make sure that the organization is making ultimately the right decision?
Yeah, so I think this is where that component of building strong relationships and trust with stakeholders come into play. I spent a lot of time doing that, like as a leader, right? So then we're able to have those conversations, those hard conversations sometimes. And so they know that we're coming from a good place, right? Like we're trying to help them be successful, whether it's the product managers or the designers that we're partnering with or the engineers. We want to make sure that the product that we're launching is successful and it is valuable to customers. So sometimes it's just about having those candid conversations to say like, hey, if you launch this is going to fail. Like, there are big issues we need to address. And we can try to do a prioritization exercise to say, okay, what are the low-hanging fruits? Let's at least tackle those. And then the big rocks we can build into the roadmap, right? Or a future sprint to address that. But we do need to address them. So I think just having those strong relationships definitely helps during those conversations and just working as a team towards solving those problems versus just dropping it on the stakeholder and be like, well, gotta fix this, so good luck. So we always try to partner closely and come up with a solution together.
Great for that relationship building. Obviously relationships are important and helpful in all areas of business. For researchers, people who have to again straddle multiple worlds, right? The balancing act between telling the truth and telling the truth in the right way requires special skill sets also about beyond maybe the relationship and the right communication style, etc., or approach, video or some other stimulus, let's say, that you might use. What other skill sets do you think are required, or what other activities do you think, a research team needs to engage in to be able to balance the hardest parts of the job if they want to have impact, if they want to be truly an equal partner or a good partner sitting at the right table?
Yeah, I think going back to our earlier conversation, with the storytelling, I think it's going to be important to kind of stitch the whole thing together and tell a cohesive story of like, here's the problem, here's our recommendations of how to address that. And it does require some soft skills. Like to your point, I think calling someone's baby ugly, it's a hard conversation, right? Just having some of that softer skills too, to have follow-up conversations and make sure that those insights are incorporated. But I think storytelling is, and the data, right? The data doesn't lie. Like we're saying,
right.
This is, we're just a messenger, right? This is what we're hearing from customers. This is what they want, or this is what they expect. And then if there is, behavioral data or other data available to just make a stronger case. And in some cases, maybe it's even going and looking at secondary research, right? Like industry research, and saying like, this is a best practice we should consider. So I think it's being able to source different data and connecting it together to build a strong case to say, here are the number of reasons why we should move in this direction. But storytelling, I think, is a big factor for sure.
Absolutely. It's an umbrella factor. And under that, you might have things like influencing skills, triangulation, kind of business savvy, right? Executive presence, even to be able to kind of be taken seriously in a way other than, well, here's what the data is and our job is done. Let's move on to the next thing, right? I wanted to highlight these things because a lot of the ingoing assumption is that, we're really focused on accuracy and quality of the data that we're generating, on kind of the technical executional aspect. And a lot of these very important drivers of impact that you were mentioning, we discussed, are often at the very end, or perhaps it's an afterthought even. And my mission is to make sure that we bring those conversations to the front of the brain, as well as to, earlier in the earlier stages of the life cycle, and to make sure that everyone, within the industry of research and insights overall, it doesn't matter kind of what area, they understand that these are requirements just as important as the software that you're using for testing or the sample size, whatever it is, right, that we obsess about so much. This is so good, Mina. Is there anything else you'd like to add in terms of kind of what you need to really drive impactful decision-making and action within the company using UX in particular specific?
Yeah, to quickly kind of close the loop on the previous conversation, I think just the conducting and scoping of the research, that's one part of the equation, right? The other part is what I call activating the insights and making sure the insights that are delivered are actually implemented. And something that I try to do in my conversations with stakeholders, especially when like a new request is coming in, right? Like we need to do research, is I try to get their commitment of when and how they're going to implement this insights. Let's say we bring 5 things, right? Big issues. Are you going to be able to incorporate that in this iteration? Or is this like a 1-year roadmap? And it's fine if it is, right? But at least we know and we have that commitment up front that we're all aligning and understanding that the timing of the insights are right. It is going to be able to, they'll be able to incorporate it and move forward. So that's like part of an early conversation is to understand that and align with stakeholders on that piece. So
Mine, that particular kind of step that you take up front, is it more under kind of like the bucket of prioritization and proper, timing kind of discussion, or is it more to drive perhaps ownership that you're holding accountable in a way, right?
Yeah.
Both or all of the above?
I would say it's both. It's earlier on, it's to determine the priority of it, right? Like if you're not going to implement this until next year, there are other projects that could benefit from insights like today, right? So we should try to work on that. But yeah, the other piece is like having that accountability and making sure that we have the commitment that yes, once the insights are delivered, we are going to make iterations on a design or a concept or idea, whatever stage we're working on.
It's not a nice to have or on someone's agenda, right, that we're trying to check off. This always kind of brings up this question that I personally struggle with at times too when we talk to our clients, and that is, the urgency of things that are higher priority and, they're going to have a real, implementation, activation kind of pressure, short term, very short term, immediately, versus which may be, let's say, a little bit more tactical, right? Because bigger problems require more time, generally speaking, versus some of those kind of bigger, longer term build out kind of roadmap strategy conversations or insights. The balancing of those two in some of the conversations I've had with people around here, around this topic, has come up as a challenging one, right? You can do a lot of good, I don't say easy, but good, effective work, on short-term objectives and check things off, etc. But the return or the impact potential there is a little bit smaller or maybe incremental, as opposed to something a little bit bigger and hairier and more strategic where the timeline is longer, the investment is bigger, the risk is higher, but the impact is, let's say disproportionately bigger. I don't know if, how you guys roadmap things like for this sprint versus, down the road. I don't know if you think about impact or it's really about resource planning, engineering, all the other kind of components that you have to deal with.
Yeah, impact is definitely a big factor. And I personally try to, as part of my relationship building with stakeholders, encourage them to include us as early as possible, like once they have an idea in mind or like planning a project, because then we can be thought partners and recommend like when and how we should try to gather insights and like what would be helpful for the team. And as I was mentioning earlier too, like timing is everything, right? Because sometimes we get pulled into projects. It's like, well, we need research next month. I'm like, I'd love to help you, but like, just to even get the right customers to participate, it takes a couple weeks sometimes, right? And the more nuanced the profile becomes, the harder it is. So yeah, just having those conversations with stakeholders to say, include us early and often, and let's think through it. And especially if it's any vision work or any kind of reimagining of this an experience, those are kind of the meaty, complex projects that where we can add the most value, because you know, being a researcher is not just testing product, it's also helping stakeholders align. You know, we do a number of things like workshops to bring everyone together and make sure, okay, are we all on the same page what problem we're solving? Are we all on the same page on timeline? Like there's a little bit of program management too involved sometimes, right? Speaking of multiple hats. So we can help drive those conversations too and help cross-functional teams align on goals and objectives. So yeah, those more complex ones are usually where the biggest impact is in just earlier stages.
Yeah. And you know, a lot more work and effort and, you know, broader skill set, right? In terms of building consensus or influencing teams, bringing them together, workshopping things, etc. Can we conclude then, Mina, that it's in addition to some of the things that we listed that are necessary, but perhaps not sufficient, kind of this whole, what I call the people factor within the organization across stakeholder groups, etc. We can label lots of different things, but navigating the people aspect of projects is also, it's intangible. Often it's not even on the resume or on the job description, but it is a necessary requirement. And sometimes that's the one that makes it sufficient, right? Like, you might have the greatest results on the greatest idea, but if you're not really kind of delivering it to the right people, the right way, in a kind of strategically managed way, there's still quite a bit of room for things to not pan out, for an idea, you know, to be taken off the table.
Yeah, for sure. And I think just the people factor is definitely there, for sure. But I like to think of researchers and UX research teams in general also as connectors, because another big challenge, especially with enterprises, is that the bigger they get, right? The bigger the teams are, the more silos organically start forming, because the reality is it's too complex. Everybody's focused on their piece of the pie and solving that. So because we partner with different teams, we're able to identify and say like, hey, this project sounds super familiar to this other project. Maybe you should talk to each other. And, you know, so like making those connections and saying, I think these two teams could benefit from working together, because it's either super similar or it's going to impact like each other. So yeah. Just kind of bridging those gaps of bringing teams together is another aspect, and making sure we're not duplicating efforts. We're thinking about solutions more holistically and thinking about the customer journey and the handoffs, right? From like product to product, because to the customer, it's one company, it's one platform. It does not, like the background and all the things that happen in the kitchen, it doesn't matter to the customer, right? To them, it's like, is it a seamless experience? Do I have to really learn stuff as I go from one product or feature to another? So those are other.
I love that term that you used, connector. I think of insights, you know, again, different kind of any function that brings the voice of the customer or the consumer into the organization as kind of like this horizontal through line, right? Regardless vertical or however the silos are organized. The corollary for me has always been mine behind that, the idea that everybody should care about the customer or the consumer, especially nowadays when not everybody, but a lot of people are still at home, right? Working at home. You know, you don't have that random connection at the office, by the kitchen, you know, water cooler, whatever we used to say. The championing of that human behind, in front of the product, application, platform, website, whatever it's working on, is often lost. Or again, I mean, of course, everybody knows we're supposed to be customer centric, right? But the day-to-day reminders, the day-to-day inspiration it feels like the way you look at it falls on the hands or shoulders of this connecting people in UX research or in research, right?
Yep.
Do you think of it through that lens as well? Or probably, I don't know, tell me how you kind of think about that.
I definitely do. I think and I encourage and coach my team to do the same, right? If they see opportunities to connect, and, it's kind of everybody's responsibility to be like the customer's advocate and also the business's advocate, right? Because if 2-3 teams are working on the same projects, that's a waste of resources, that's a waste of money. So just having more of that entrepreneurship mindset, I guess, and trying to make the connections and help reduce waste and duplication. And so, yeah, I would say definitely I look at it that way. And I do have a lot of empathy for a lot of our stakeholders and partners, right? And specifically like our product managers, they have to work with so many partners. And I don't think, honestly, anyone that I've worked with so far has intentionally not been customer centric. I think it's just the competing priorities and like all the many different directions they're being pulled. And it just becomes harder to carve out time to say like, okay, let's go talk to, 10 or 20 customers to see. And sometimes like go, there's these timelines and it's like time crunch. So yeah, the other piece I would say is like, as researchers, we can't be too rigid with our approach and the methodology. Sometimes you have to get creative and figure out like what is needed for the business and what is good for this stakeholder in this situation and adapt, right? So adaptability and like creativity with the approach, I think will go a long way too. So
love that. I think the way you raise this point is actually so important. And I don't know if some of the podcast guests we've had so far, I don't know if anyone has really brought that up, but this idea of, first of all, don't be another silo, right? That's connecting all the silos, be the champion, the advocate, but also make sure that, accountability for the overall business, make sure that you are thinking openly or as flexibly, as openly as possible about creative solutions to things, if that's what's required to drive that and drive that impact, as opposed to, God forbid, we do something because we will. Okay, we're not going to say that. I'm not going to say that's how we will always done, but we're going to say this is one methodology that was to be the methodology for this particular objective. But also think about, okay, what is really needed and what does it take? And sometimes it's a hybrid or it's some new approach or good enough as opposed to like really good or perfect methodology, right?
Yeah.
That permission is very important to truly driving impact.
Yeah, of course. I mean, we all want to be rigorous with our approach and make sure, we have all the T's crossed and I's dotted. But sometimes the reality is when you're crunched on time and maybe you have to take a more scrappy approach, right? And then we get some feedback, or maybe we need to adjust the methodology and adapt it to a way that works for us, right? Like, jobs to be done is a good example of that. It's like, out of the box, it might not work for you. So you would have to figure out what works for your organization and how do you pull the pieces that are useful and then leave the other parts that are not benefiting the team, right?
Awesome. Mina, I know we can talk on and on like this. Maybe in circles a little bit, but I think it's really reinforcing and helpful to triangulate on some of these issues, because every time there's different lens through which you can look and kind of arrive at an insightful aha. But I usually end my podcasts with 3 questions. I would love to serve these up to you. So the first one is specifically, personally, tell us one small thing that you do in your daily life, perhaps to drive positive impact, work, in your team, in your community, or the world most broadly.
So the one thing I intentionally try to do is express appreciation to those around me, whether it's partners, family, friends. Randomly, I'll send a text or a Slack message and just share, like, I appreciate them and the work they're doing, because I think people like to be appreciated and we don't express appreciation often enough, even though we may think it in our head, right? Like, oh my God, this person just went above and beyond. Like, they're so amazing, right? I enjoy working with them, but I think what lacks sometimes is letting them know. And, oftentimes that might not know. So sort of like positive reinforcement, right? Just letting them know when they're doing something good.
And activated positive reinforcement, right? not just in your head. Awesome. Very good. Love that. The second question is kind of like, what would you, the other way around, what would you expect or what would you encourage our audience members, our listeners to do in order for them to have positive impact in kind of all these different areas of life?
I honestly, just because I'm a huge proponent of expressing appreciation, I'd encourage others to do the same. It doesn't take a lot of effort. It's literally one text or one Slack message, so you don't have to like do whole planning around it, right? Just maybe it's a calendar invite, really, just to say like, show appreciation to someone. I think it goes a long way, because also, like, if you think about it, a lot of people, whether they're early in their career or more senior, they struggle with imposter syndrome, right? And that one note might be the thing that they needed that day to help like elevate their mood and their confidence. So,
like you said, everyone likes to be appreciated, to know that they're appreciated. Beautiful.
Yep.
Mina, this has been so insightful, informative on so many levels. I know that listeners are going to take a ton of notes, and we will do kind of a quick recap in terms of podcast notes as well. But I wanted to ask my last question here. If anyone wants to learn more about you or from you, get in touch, what's the best way to find you and reach out to you?
LinkedIn. So I'm very active on that platform, usually responsive, unless, someone trying to sell me something repeatedly. then I might never. Yeah. But otherwise, usually like if I have any talks or any podcasts, this would be one I would share. So I typically share on that platform, and I can be reached there. Yep.
And mine always shares great content. So I would definitely encourage our listeners to reach out to her and learn from some of the insights and material that you share. Mina, thank you so much. I really do appreciate your generous sharing of your experiences, your kind of takeaways from years of doing this in different industries, and the kind of the intellectual rigor that you put into this. I think there's a great wealth of kind of insights here that will at least touch and be relevant many, many people, but for some in particular. And honestly, I don't think it's just for UX people. There's a lot of great that applies across the board, right? This has been so informative, so insightful. Thank you so much for being my guest today.
Yeah, no, the pleasure was all mine. Thank you so much for having me. I always enjoy doing a deeper dive into these topics, so I get passionate about them. So thanks for the opportunity.
We could tell. We could tell.
Thank you.
Very awesome. Thank you, Mina. As you heard in this episode of All About Impact, it takes an intelligent, customer-centric, and trust-based balancing of strategy and tactics to achieve impactful research within UX. What is your formula for driving impact in your organization? Impact is the next frontier of research and insights, and it could be a lot easier with the right partner next to you. Reach out to me, Susan Petoyan, on LinkedIn, and let's together discover the impact champion in you. Tune in next week for another episode of All About Impact.